Despite the fact that 2024 was an eventful year, both in Ottawa and around the world, food policy in Canada remained a top headline grabber from January to December. Food prices are still inflated, food bank visits are now up to shocking levels, and food distribution suffered setbacks due to labor disputes at ports and railways. These top headlines don't even include the potential impact of Donald Trump's proposed tariffs, and of course, there is a growing debate over the carbon tax and its impact on food prices. Joining me now to discuss these top headlines is Dr. Sylvain Charlebois from Dalhousie University's Agri-Food Analytics Lab. Sylvain, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
So your top story, you published on this, food bank usage hitting what feels like record numbers. Can you give us the lay of the land in terms of just how dependent Canadians are now on food banks?
Yeah, how can it not be the number one food story of the year? So every year we actually do our top 10, but this year it wasn't hard to pick that one issue. Food bank usage is high. It's at a record high this year. We estimate that over 2 million Canadians actually visit food banks every month right now. And the food insecurity level is at 23.9%, which is almost 10% more than in the US. So something is really going wrong right now in Canada, and you just go to a food bank and see how busy they are. The working poor is also a big segment of the population right now. A lot of people do have jobs, even two, three jobs, and they still have to go to food banks to make ends meet. So obviously, a lot of people are being left behind.
Yeah, you mentioned working poor. Is that a newer phenomenon, or is that part of the reason for the increase? Because, I mean, when we see these food banks talk about the holiday influx, I know there have been several instances where we're not just talking about people who are maybe unemployed or underemployed. In many instances, we're talking about people who are fully employed.
No, absolutely. It's not a new phenomena, but the phenomena is growing.
Hmm.
And so we know that like almost a third of people who go to food banks are people who are working, would have a job or two or three.
Hmm.
And so that phenomena is really growing. That made things obvious. I think really the big problem is the cost of living issue. With interest rates much higher than before, it really caught a lot of people off guard, especially people in the middle class.
And on that note of costs of living, one of the debates that you've been right in the middle of is the carbon tax and its impact on food. What is your view in terms of how carbon pricing impacts the food system?
I think, and I've actually testified before Parliament a few times about this, and at Senate also once, to argue that, and I think we're getting this all wrong. The fascination around retail prices is the wrong focus. I think we should look at competitiveness, the agri-food sector's competitiveness, and that's where we're starting to see some wheels falling off essentially. Because if you look at wholesale food prices in Canada versus wholesale food prices in the US, ours have actually gone up 40% more than
Hmm.
in the US since 2019 when the federal carbon tax was implemented. So certainly very concerned about competitiveness, which means that grocers will likely be more tempted to actually buy outside of Canada to feed Canadians than actually buying food that was grown and produced right here in Canada. And that can lead to more food insecurity down the road, and food affordability will eventually be impacted. But for now, most of the studies that I've seen looking at retail prices or correlating retail prices, food retail prices with the carbon tax, are measuring something that can't be measured at all, because a lot
Hmm.
of things can actually impact retail prices: the weather, consumer behavior,
Sure.
loss leading, promotions. Lots of things can actually impact retail prices.
Yeah, there are definitely other market dynamics that play into it, but I'm curious for the people who've been critical of you, we only have about 30 seconds here and we'll pick it up when we come back. But if carbon pricing isn't inflating the production process, then one could come to the conclusion that it's not working to reduce emissions. Is that an accurate assumption?
we're not even trying to measure how the carbon tax is impacting the environment. And Minister Guilbeault himself actually admitted it, and that's a huge
Mhm.
blind spot for the policy.
All right, Sylvain, we're going to go to break quickly here, but we will come right back. We're going to look at a couple more of these big stories, including Ozempic and its impact on the food supply. We'll be right back. We're back with Sylvain Charlebois from Dalhousie University's Agri-Food Analytics Lab. Sylvain, before the break, I mentioned Ozempic and GLP-1 drugs. You have this in your top 10 food stories for the year. Obviously, we've covered this pretty extensively in terms of the health side of it,
Yeah.
but walk us through what the potential impact could be in terms of what Canadians eat, what they're looking for in the marketplace. How is this changing the market for food?
Yeah, so well, I mean, 2024 was a year when Oprah Winfrey resigned from the Weight Watchers board of directors, and it came as a shock because she was admitting that she was using a GLP-1 drug to lose weight. And if you have seen Oprah Winfrey of late, she's obviously lost a lot of weight, and I think it got a lot of politicians, industry to think differently about the market. And we actually did release a study on GLP-1s earlier this year, and we were contacted by a few uh, major food players, and I must say a lot of food companies are concerned because if you have say 35 million people on GLP-1s, and all of a sudden they don't impulse consume, they don't
Hmm.
impulse buy, they don't drink alcohol as much. I mean, it changes the dynamic at the grocery store, in restaurants, at the liquor store, everything really. And so I think over the next several years you'll see a food industry trying to really understand exactly what it means to service a market with so many people using this type of medication. In fact, we've seen one company releasing a Ozempic friendly product, or
Okay.
Ozempic friendly products over the last several months. So it's just the beginning, really.
What is it? What is an Ozempic friendly product?
Because I mean, a lot of people when they eat too much sugar or sodium, they actually feel ill, and so
Yep.
I suspect that it's comforting to know that a company may have thought about some of these
Okay.
people. It's
Yep.
like the gluten-free phenomena, but
Yep.
I do think we're going to see more of these products in the future.
Okay. Um, GST holiday. That was announced. It took a while to go through.
Yeah.
There have been some murmurs that restaurants are appreciating it right now. What is the
Oh, they are
impact?
absolutely.
What's the impact here? How do you see this playing out over the next month and a half in terms of the impact this is going to have on the food industry, the restaurant industry?
No, I think, well, when you look at the food industry in particular, I think there'll be a shift from retail to service probably
Hmm.
over the next couple of months, because savings are much more interesting at the restaurant. In Ontario, for example, it's a minus 13%. In
Yeah.
New Brunswick, it's minus 15. Nova Scotia minus 14. So savings are pretty substantial. At the grocery store. Very few products are taxed.
Yeah.
Really, the ready to eat products, snacks, and things like that. But the bottom line is that it really has created a lot of chaos in the industry. Companies like PepsiCo Canada decided to boycott the new law, essentially saying that it will continue to charge GST to its clients like Loblaw and Sobeys. So they're getting the squeeze.
And
And of course, in a
is the
grocery
reason
store, you
for
got
that? Is the reason for that just that it's too complicated to go through all the SKUs and reconfigure the system, or is there something else at play here?
I think well, that's what's being claimed. My guess is that Canada is just not that important for a
Okay.
multinational. I mean, why bother spending all that money just to accommodate a small market for 2 months, the busiest months of the year, by the way?
Yeah. Okay. Food recalls. We've had you on our program here, Farm Daily, as the food recalls have been announced for the year over the year. Are we seeing an uptick in food recalls, and should we be concerned? We have about a minute before we have to go to break.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of food recalls, 2024 will be year number 3 in terms of the record number of food recalls. So it's not a record year, but close.
Hmm.
And I think really some of the recalls that impacted high volume food categories like bakery, for example, cantaloupes as well.
Yep.
So that's probably why we heard a lot more about food recalls in general.
Is there anything different in the food supply now, or is this just where we have a better pulse on catching these problems as they arise?
I just think that media is doing its job. I mean,
Okay.
in terms of risk communication, we're highly reliant on risk communication, and frankly, I was shocked, surprisingly shocked, that media still had some capacity
Yeah.
to inform the public about some of these food recalls.
Well, Sylvain, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.